Comrades, Andrew Austin of the FAR podcast, Freedom and Reason, associated with the Freedom and Reason blog. I urge you to rush over to the Freedom and Reason blog and read my articles. They come almost daily. They're quite detailed. The URL is andrewaustin.blog, andrewaustin.blog. One entry may have you puzzled. The entry is me talking about Steve Bannon. I talk about Steve Bannon in rather glowing terms, and I'm not going to rehearse what I said here. So you'll go read it. But I did want to say that one thing that I'm encountering more, and I'm picking it up even more than I'm encountering it, is this puzzlement that people have about my politics. And they listen to me and they think, wait a second, so he has a problem with immigration, and I have several blog entries that lay that out. I became particularly obsessed with that issue in 2018-19. So you can read about that. He has some other views. He sounds like he's not down with the desire to see capitalism collapse and billions of people around the planet suffer in the collapse, which apparently some people think is a prerequisite to moving to socialism. I would just remind them that socialism isn't inevitable. Capitalism doesn't inevitably give way to socialism. Socialism has to be built. It has to be fought for and won in the context of a capitalist economy. Now, some would say, well, what about third world communism, third world socialism? Didn't it, skip over the capitalist step? And now we're getting into a debate about whether we believe there are, some iron law of historical stages. I don't buy into any of that. I would point out that the capitalism in the third world was capitalism, even though these are peripheral or satellites, if you will, of the core Western capitalist countries, doesn't mean they weren't capitalist in some sense. And moreover, the socialism that is developed there, and let's just take China, since that's the 1.4 billion people and continues under the boot of the Chinese Communist Party, as we can see, that hasn't worked out so well for the Chinese, at least in many respects, without the bourgeois values of free speech, free expression, religious liberty, all of those things that, as a libertarian, I value. And yes, I am a libertarian. I'm a libertarian Marxist. I believe that the way in which we fully realize the libertarian values that we should all embrace and that are representative of fundamental human rights, those will be fully realized in an economy in which the workers own and control the means of production. But they have to do so democratically. What you see in China today is a kind of bureaucratic collectivism, state totalitarian socialism, and which dovetails nicely with the globalists in the Western world who long ago gave up on democracy and individual liberty. They don't want citizens in a republic. They want consumers in a corporate state. And so this explains how the Chinese Communist Party, their goals can dovetail with the corporatist, the globalist in the West, and why populist movements, right and left, need to make common cause to fight back against that. Roundabout way of getting back to why did I write a blog entry about Stephen K. Bannon? Now, I say in that blog entry that all the reasons I don't agree with him. There are the issues that I don't agree with him. There are many. But we're in a moment where the most important thing we can do is preserve the Republican machinery. Without the Republican machinery, without the nation state, the Westphalian system, the working class does not have the machinery it needs in order to transform society. So the goals of Bannon are very different from mine. He wants to save Christian civilization. He wants to save capitalism. He's an economic nationalist. He's a nationalist capitalist. I'm advocating for the transformation of capitalism into a socialist society in a national context, because it is the national context as it developed in the West, republicanism, that has the civil rights, the attention, the focus on civil rights and human rights. So personal liberty, the ability to participate in your local political and state and national level political system, all of that exist in the West in that development. All that grows out of the development of the nation state, the Enlightenment, right? Secularism. All these things are vitally important principles. So the left has become thoroughly corrupted by postmodernist, postcolonialist, identitarian politics. They serve the function in the grassroots of steering left-wing politics in a corporatist direction. It's why so many progressives are so sweet on China, extol Chinese virtues. And of course, these aren't the Chinese virtues. The rank and file Chinese proletarian is not not advocating state corporatism or totalitarian socialism. This is not where their values are, but it's where the values of the progressive left are. They're very Maoist in their orientation, and this is a development that goes back many decades, and particularly with the influence of French post-structuralist, postmodernist thinking. So we have to be careful with right-wing nationalism. And in fact, one of the ways of being careful with right-wing nationalism is to engage it. Steve Bannon is always asking Bernie supporters to think about their movement, the Trump movement, and I think they should. One way that you prevent right-wing nationalism from becoming race nationalism, and I don't think Steve Bannon is a racist. I don't think right-wing nationalism, populism is a racist movement. I disagree. People on the left see that. Of course they see that. They're identitarians. Everything's about race. They don't think about social class, and that's a core problem. Bannon is thinking about class. He's thinking about the working class, working classes in the United States, working classes in China. So by engaging populism, by the left taking populism as its strategy to, small d democratic values, pushing for free speech and liberty, pushing for individual liberty, by taking that and blending it with the class analysis that we need to understand the way the world works, and a critique of corporatism, a critique of globalism, then you bring those who would be tempted to slide into racial ways of thinking. You blunt that tendency. And so it isn't that you say, oh my God, the right wing is populist, they're nationalists, run away from that. You run towards it, and you say, wait a second, the nation state, the republicanism, Bill of Rights, socialism is something we aspire to. We don't want to sacrifice individual liberty and freedom and democracy in our loathing of capitalism. We want to rush towards populist politics, and we want to own it, take it over. And while Bannon seeks to pull people from the populist left into his movement, we can pull people from the populist right into a genuine socialist movement that reflects the interests of the working class. Anyway, this is just something I wanted to invite you to go read the essay. I don't want anybody for a second to think that my politics are right-wing nationalist. I'm not on the right. I'm a Marxist, very much on the left, and very much an advocate of democratic socialism, genuine democracy, not social democracy, not progressivism, genuine democratic socialism. I am a person who is an atheist, secular, liberal with respect to free speech rights and expression, all the things that one finds in the Bill of Rights, the protection of the individual against government excess, against government control. I am very much committed to the left. In fact, in my view, my positions are much more consistent with the underlying principle of left-wing thought than progressives are, who unknowingly, in many cases unknowingly, are in cahoots with the transnational, the globalist, the corporatist wing. And you can see this in how their politics of equity, diversity, and inclusion, rather than class struggle, rather than focusing on the antagonisms between the capitalist class and the working class, that this focus on identitarianism, this obsession with race, is seen in the way in which the administrations of the universities operate, and the universities that prepare young people to take up roles within the corporate state. You can see it with the way corporations, with their diversity rules, with all the training in, inclusion, and so forth. That the very rhetoric that and the way in which the social media platforms, and this is crucial, actually push this version of left-wing politics, progressivism. It's not really left-wing. It wants to keep, it wants to have open borders, which is devastating to the working class. Open borders is a strategy of the globalist, of the capitalist. And so when you hear the left advocate for corporatist policies of open borders, you realize that they've lost their way. And this is the dominant voice, of course, because voices contrary to that are either right-wing or branded right-wing, or are on the left, but so marginalized and excluded from the public sphere and being able to have open conversations about it. So that's where my politics are. I don't want anybody to misunderstand. My politics have not changed. They have changed in some way. I have become more consistent in terms of principle, and always in reference to the facts that are out there. So just one example, when you learn this, you have to change your attitude on immigration. When I learned this, I was floored that because of mass immigration, when we were having some million foreigners coming into the United States every year to work, and that means that they're working at jobs that native-born Americans aren't working at. Members of the working class are not working at, and with high unemployment or higher unemployment in those communities. And just think about the Black, native-born Black and Latino communities in this country. That when you realize that arrangement sees the transfer of $500 billion every year from the working class, the native-born working class, to the capitalist class because of the exploitation of cheap foreign labor by the capitalist class. When you see that, you have to step back and say, wait a second, that's money that people could have used to pay their mortgage, to purchase health care, to send their kids to college. And yet, instead, what you see these deindustrialized places in America with high fentanyl, use, addiction, overdosing. This is what what global capitalism has brought to the working class. So you can't be pro-working class and support the policies that are destroying the working class. Okay, so I've said this, on my blog. Again, I want to encourage you to go read it at andrewaustin.blog. It's the Freedom and Reason blog. This is the Freedom and Reason podcast. I'm recording today without intro and outro bumpers. Maybe you're tired of hearing that it's a lot cooler over here. But it is. Later. Peace.